we are in Esther, chapter 7. We looked at in chapter 6 last week. We looked at the plot that Haman had worked that did not work for him. And how did we end chapter 6? What was Haman's condition? In chapter 6, no, not in the end of chapter 6. What would he end up in the end of chapter 6?
He'd been yelling good news, bad news, all day.
Yeah, so
He'd gotten bad news. They came to get him.
yeah, so he got really bad news. The news that he was going to have to, which he honored Mordecai. And then not only did he have to honor Mordecai, what else happened? What did his family, his wife, and his friends tell him at the end of the chapter? Yeah, they pretty much said, hope is lost. You're gonna, it's not good for you. So that was what we ended up with. And that's the last part there. In verse 13, it says, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but surely fall before him. So his plot against Mordecai was they could see that everything that he tried to do was just not working. And now that Mordecai has been honored and put into that honored position by the king, recognize he can't just go to the king the next day or immediately and say, hey, I want to hang that guy you just honored. It's not going to happen. And so they knew that he was sunk. They knew that his plan was done. Now I want us to think about, what did he have prepared for Haman? Okay, a gallows. Where was those gallows placed? Do you remember what it said? I think it just said it was to be built, didn't it? Did they build the gallows? As we see in chapter 7, they're built right at his house. Right there. And so that's going to be a fitting place for them to be as we start chapter 7. And so remember, his friends told him this, that he was surely going to sink in front of Mordecai before he can have time to process that. He couldn't even think about it. He couldn't react. In the moment that they were saying that, they were still talking to him. The king had ordered him to come to the next feast. So he went to the first feast in what way? How was he feeling then? Yeah, pretty arrogant, pretty prideful, at top of his game, he thinks. He thinks everything's just amazing. He is going to the second one a lot different. Now, he probably still has on his mind that, hey, I'm being recognized by the queen. This is still a good thing. But he has definitely had a lot of things happen to him that has humbled him, in a sense. And so as we approach this chapter, he's not going to have much time to think, even in this sense, as we get to here. And so somebody want to read, I'm going to say verse 1 through 6, please.
So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he, and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen.
All right, so the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. Verse 2, it says on the second day. So this was not the second day of the feast. This would have been the second day, as in the second feast that they were now a part of. And so it's been 2 days. So day 1 and day 2 of the feast, and now we have this. So now they're in the second feast, and so the stage is getting set for everything to be revealed. The gallows are made, and so that's important to remember as we get in this chapter. The king, he's anxious, right? He's wanting to know, why do you keep asking for this feast? He's getting anxious. He wants to know what's going on. Esther, she's been preparing for this. She's been using her wisdom. She's prepared by fasting and praying. She's prepared herself, and Haman is now at a low point. Remember I said in chapter 6, Haman's way up here, and everything that happens just keeps knocking him down farther and farther and farther. And now we're getting to that really low point for him. And so he gives her the same answer. He says, what is your request? What is your petition? It shall be granted to you up to half the kingdom. So we talked about that before. Same thing as we saw before. It will be done. So then verse 3, Esther does not hold back anymore. She answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me at my petition and my people at my request. And so she asked for 2 things. What does she ask for? Her life and her people. And I think it's interesting because she uses 2 different words. And if you look at the Hebrew, it is 2 different words. She doesn't say, my request is my life and my people. She says, my petition is my people, or my life be my petition, and my people my request. Those are 2 different Hebrew words, but they're very similar. They both mean to request something. But the last one, it's usually only used in reference to a request to a royalty. And so she is in a sense, she's not begging, but she's pleading with the king, save my life. I'm requesting my life to be saved. I'm pleading to you as royalty for my people. What do you think is going through the king's mind at this time? What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
I think it probably, maybe in his brain, the puzzle pieces might start coming together because unless he just forgot he signed that decree about Jews, I don't know.
I think that it's definitely going to come together here, puzzle pieces in a second, especially the next verse, what she says in verse 4. She says, for we have been sold, my people and I. Notice she is including herself in this. Okay? What does she mean by sold?
Well, Haman said he was going to give money for their destruction.
Okay. So Haman was paying money for the Jews. Who was selling the Jews? Ahasuerus was. Think about that. She is saying we have been sold for a price. Haman offered these 10,000 shekels of silver for the life of the Jews. And the king said, yeah. Now, he didn't know it was the Jews. He didn't know it was her. But you think about it, she is saying, she's confronting him also. And what do you think that's going to do for him? He didn't know he did this. So now he's going to be angry because he got deceived into doing something he didn't know. He understood that he was killing a people, but he didn't realize who it was and who he was actually including, which was his wife.
A lot of questions either.
No.
Haman brought that to him because I think Haman knew him well enough when he proposed that. He was like, well, these people that live here don't worship you, don't do what they're supposed to, and he knew that wording was going to make the king angry.
Yeah. Well, and also, what have we seen from the king with reference to Haman, even through honoring Mordecai? Yeah, he really trusted him. He looked at him as a trusted counterpart. A matter of fact, when he is disturbed by the fact that he hasn't honored Mordecai, Haman tells him, have your greatest prince go and parade him through the streets. And who does the king pick? You know, we talked about that a little bit last week, and the fact that, you know, Haman should have looked at that as a great honor, that he looked at him as that greatest prince that was to be giving this honor to this person he wanted to honor, but he didn't. And so I think throughout all of this, he doesn't suspect Haman at all. You know, he looks at Haman as someone he trusts, and so when he came to him with that request, he didn't question it. And so here, now he's starting to realize, wait a second, and this has been a little while. This hasn't been just a day or two since this petition's been put out, or this proclamation's been put out. It's been a little while. And so, you know, he has, and the thing is he then has been and he's had a part in selling these people to, you know, and including her. And I'm sure this is going to enrage the king, knowing that he was deceived into selling his own wife, and killing his own wife. And so what does she say? She says, sold, verse 4, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Why does she say that 3 different ways? Now, each one of them means something. I mean, a little different. You know, you think about to be destroyed. What do you think about being destroyed? Completely gone. But, you know, destroyed doesn't mean everything's gone. Killed, that's indicating that they're not being just taken out or, you know, losing everything, but they're getting killed. But when she says annihilated, what does that mean? Do what? With zeal. Yeah. It's going to happen, and all of them are going to be gone, and including herself. And she's including them. And I think that's important here. She is including herself. Because notice what she says here, for we have been sold. She doesn't say my people. She says we have been sold. And had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue. Notice that. If the price of them being sold was just to be put into slavery, she's saying, I wouldn't be here in front of you right now requesting this. Why would that be? Well, they'd still be alive. They're already in bondage, right? And, you know, under the Medo-Persians, they're going to be released. I think at this point, some of them have been released. I remember our timelines here. But, you know, we see here that they are able to go home, but being sold into slavery, they're not dying. And so, but she says here, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's losses. Who's the enemy? Haman. Compensate for the king's losses. What does he mean by that? What does she mean by that? What losses is she talking about? Yeah. The people, the Jews, if all of them are annihilated, yeah, he's getting paid 10,000 talents of silver. We talked about how much money that was. It was a lot of money. But what is he going to lose?
He'd also lose his family.
Yeah,
His wife.
he lost his wife, which, you know, hopefully that's important to him.
Taxes.
Yeah. Yeah, God's protection. The taxes. I'm sure they had businesses where they were helping the economy. All indications seem to be that she understood and he understood that these people were integrated into their community and they were an asset to the community. And so by them being annihilated, it's going to hurt him financially and in a lot of ways, you know, personally. And so, you know, you think about that, you know, the people were a blessing to the king in this kingdom, right? Because they were God's people. Is that the same for us today? Shouldn't that be the same for us today? You know, shouldn't we be an asset to our communities? You know, if we're annihilated or we're all gone, you know, I would hope to think that we have hopefully been a blessing to this community, helped this community. What about our nation? Same thing, right? And so I think that's a lesson we can learn there. And so we can see that they were an asset, and she recognized they were, and I think he did too, by the fact that he gets enraged here. And so look at verse 5. And so King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? Notice his shock here. He's thinking, who would do this? He does a lot of crazy things himself, doesn't he? We've talked about that. But to him, this is crazy. He's like, why would somebody in their heart deem to try to do this? Who would do that? I don't think at this point he still hasn't figured out that he's the one that did this too, that he's included in this. But I think that, he's looking at, he's trying to figure this out. He's trying to figure out who it is. And so what does she say, verse 6? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. All right, so the king here, he's asking for who this is, Haman. Now she gives, first off, I want to notice this. You can see the surprise and the anger in his answer to her. He's perplexed. What does that word perplexed mean? He's confused. He's trying to figure out what's going on. Who was perplexed before this? The people. When the proclamation went out, the Jews were perplexed. They were like, well, what's going on? Why did this happen? They couldn't figure it out. Now, the shoe's on the other foot, and the king here is perplexed. He's confused. He's trying to figure out, well, who would do this? Why did this happen? And so she says that it's Haman. And she uses three descriptions. We know him as prideful and arrogant, right? We've talked about that over and over again, how prideful and arrogant is. His prideful and arrogant attitude led to these three characteristics about him, or descriptions of him. The first one, she says, he is an adversary. Word study says it's an enemy, a foe, an oppressor. Okay? So is he those things? Sure. He's an oppressor. He's a foe. He's trying to do what he can. He is an enemy. Strong says that's a foe, but also it has that idea of hating. When we talk about hate, what does hate involve? Okay, hate usually involves the desire for harm for that person, something bad happened to him. And so she is saying he is an enemy in the sense that he is hateful. He hates us. One who wishes to overthrow or destroy another. But think about this. His actions was not only as the enemy of Esther and the Jews. Who else is he an enemy of? By what we just talked about with the compensation there, how it was going to be killing his assets for the kingdom. Who did he then become an enemy of also? The state, the enemy, the kingdom, and really the king. He's now an enemy of the king and the kingdom because he's trying to harm the kingdom. He's trying to harm the people. And so he's really an enemy of everybody. His pride and arrogance cause issue for more people than himself. Is that true of anybody that's prideful and arrogant? We talked about that, I think, a little bit last week. And says he was wicked. That means bad or evil. And so she points him out. You can imagine the scene here. They're eating. She's sitting on her couch. The king's requesting. He's confused. Haman has probably got it figured out. Because he's been conniving. He's been deceiving. He's been trying to do this. And then she turns and says it's him. He is that adversary, that enemy, that wicked person. He's the one. And what is his reaction? His reaction was terror. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The word study says that word terrified or terror means to fear or to be or make afraid, to startle. He was startled. Not only that, word study continues on to say this. The basic idea of this word can be summarized as an individual's realization that he or she is less powerful than someone or something else and can be overcome. I think that's interesting. When you think about our fear of God, we're supposed to fear God. We recognize he is all-powerful. He is able to do whatever he wants with us. Haman, at this point, has that same fear of who? Esther and the king, right? because he knows the king's angry. But not only that, Esther now has shown him that she has the ability to be in the king's ear and cause something to happen to him. And so he's scared out of his mind. And so there does not seem to be any indication in this text that Haman knew Esther was a Jew before this point at all. Do you think he would have went through with all this if he had known Esther was a Jew? I don't know. It's hard to tell.
My question is, did Esther have the authority to do anything to Haman without the king?
I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe she did, because she was the queen.
She wasn't going to do it. She was going to let the king do it.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know. Do you think she'd have some authority to,
Mm-hmm.
We also saw what happened, or she had to have seen what happened with Vashti whenever she just said, I'm not listening to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And either way, I mean, she's at the point where the king has said, I'll give you anything you want. And so she could ask for anything she wanted. Here she is saying, but she doesn't say kill him. She just says, this is the person. The king's going to deal with it.
I find it interesting though in the next verse that Haman pleaded with the queen. Why didn't he follow the king pleading with him and saying she's lying? Because she's not presenting
Any facts, yeah.
she's just making the statement, and I find it interesting that he's pleading with her and not with him.
Yeah, I think because he knows that if he's going to get anywhere, he's got to get somewhere with her, because she's the one that got the king angry with him. And so, and she's got a power over him at this point. And so he's pleading with her. Maybe he didn't think he was going to get anywhere with the king because the king left in a rage. I mean, he probably had it figured out at that point. Hey, it was that decree, it was this. He's probably piecing it together now.
So is that what that means when it says he saw that evil was determined?
Mm-hmm. Yep. He saw the evil in his eye. He saw what was going on with the king. And so that's verse 7. It says, and the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw the evil was determined against him by the king. Maybe he knew that he wasn't going to be able to change the king's mind, that the king had already made up his mind he was going to do something. Now, why the king didn't at that point just say, you're dead, I don't know. Maybe he wanted to cool off. Maybe he wanted to think about it. But he left, went out into the garden, and used that opportunity to maybe clear his mind, maybe continue to piece it together, figured out what's going on. I don't know. It doesn't tell us.
I think the background of the relationship was far deeper with Haman than his wife. But his wife had such a convincing argument that I think that, he wasn't a dumb guy. We see that he was severe, but I don't think he was always rash in his decisions.
No. And she's built up a pretty big deal to this point. 2 different banquets. He has given her the opportunity to get anything she wants, and she's saying, "Save me, save my people." That's all she's asking for. And so it's interesting. And so, what is Haman's reaction? Well, he pleads. He's begging. That's the idea there. He's begging for his life to the queen. He is hoping that he would be able to change her mind and find mercy for him. If he could find mercy with her, maybe she can convince the king to find mercy for him. But we know that's not going to happen. So verse 8 says, when the king returned from the palace garden to the place of banquet of wine, Haman has fallen across a couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? So, we talk about Haman's downfall. It was way up here. And then he had to honor Mordecai. That knocked him down. And now he's right here to where now he has been told to the king of what he has done. And now he's fallen even lower to the point. This couch is, the idea there is that they would eat while lounging. So here she has her own couch. She's lounging on this couch. And he's laid over this couch at her feet, begging her to save him. Well, what's the king's reaction when he comes in? He doesn't hear that. He just comes in and sees Haman laying on the couch with his wife. And now he thinks he's trying to assault her. The word assault there means to force upon. So it could be anything. But I think the idea, he's thinking that his wife, he's trying to come on to his wife. He's trying to force himself upon her while he's out. And so, as he is speaking, notice there, the end of that verse, it says, as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So the king hasn't even finished, he's just finished his word, and they just swoop him up and take him out. And so, what are you laughing for?
I love the end of this verse. They covered his face.
Yeah.
Are dead.
And so Butler said this in his commentary. According to Roman historians Livy and Cirio, and some of the Greek historians, it was customary to place a hood or a covering over the face of the condemned man who was no longer worthy to see the light. The Greeks and Romans must have copied that practice from the Persians. And so this action of covering his head means you don't have another minute to see the light anymore. You're going to die. They knew, the servants knew, that it was over for him. And so they cover his head. The king doesn't have to say it. They cover his head, and they drag him out. And so in that moment, notice then the next thing. It says, now Harabana, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. So you think about that. This eunuch, now, have we talked about eunuchs before? What were the eunuchs' purpose? What were their jobs? Another, I think King James says chamberlain. What was their jobs?
Protect the women of the palace.
Okay, protect women of the palace. What have the eunuchs been doing for Esther before this? Protecting her, but also communicating to who? To Mordecai. So do you think that this man, this is the first one of the first ones we read about his name, do you think he knew what was going on and was preparing for this moment? He's probably thinking, hey, this is a good opportunity to bring this up. The king doesn't even know. He says, hey, Haman, he built this gallows right over there, and it's at his house, right in front of his house. They could see it, which is interesting. The king hadn't noticed it at this point. Maybe didn't know what was going on. But he says, hey, here, Haman had this gallows made for Mordecai to kill. Now, what do you think would have gone through the king's mind when he heard that? Because he didn't know about that yet either, did he? So now it's another notch on Haman's death certificate. That, hey, this man that I just honored, that I really, loved because he saved my life, he was going to hang him on that? And so all of this leads to him, then the king saying, hang him on it. And so they hanged Haman on the gallows. He prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. Could you imagine what that would be like for his family and his household? To see him hung right out of their house.
After he bragged to his family about what he was going to do.
Yep. Bragged to his family, his friends, his servants about who he was, what had been done for him. Not only that, we're going to see in the next chapter, Mordecai then becomes the head of that house. And so, all of this happened, and now his life is ended right there in front of his house for everybody to see. And so this then appeases the wrath of the king. Now, was the problem fixed? In the king's eyes, it was fixed, right? He had dealt with the person that caused all this problem. We're going to find out in the next chapter, of course, the issue is still there. The proclamations still happening. And so something needs to happen. And so, there's a couple verses, we're out of time, but there's a few verses there to look at. There's some proverbs and things about making a pit and falling in it. Is that what he did? He did exactly that. And so we can't deceive God, and he was trying to, in a sense, and didn't. So any questions or comments on chapter 7?
I was thinking about King's perspective, he spent years dating, you know, playing the bachelor, and so went through, you know, who knows how many candidates, and then finally got to Esther, and so he knew, you know, what was out there, and to have Esther stand out the way she did, you know, and then this relationship that started, you know, he clearly had a respect for her,
Mm-hmm.
you know, an adoration for her, and then to find out that his buddy had schemed to kill her
Yeah.
after all that.
Yeah, I'm sure that made him mad. Yep. Pretty interesting. So, all right.